Commonwealth and other friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the afternoon session. My name is Groenwald, and when CG Scotland this morning introduced the topics and she spoke about a few brave men, I think she meant me. This panel, of course, is continuing where we have been, what we have been talking about this morning in terms of the overall subject of empowered future for women and girls. More specifically for us today, or for this panel, we're talking about women, peace and security. And of course, we all know, we've seen the stats, even in the booklet that you have been given. You have seen the stats there, the 9% and the 35%, a little bit more about that later on. But we have seen that there's specifically the fact that women and girls are disproportionately affected by conflict. And addressing this challenge, we have also seen the UN resolution, Security Council Resolution 1325, that was adopted in 2000, and it was also adopted during a time when one of the Commonwealth countries, Namibia, and there was a speaker earlier from Namibia, who was the president at that stage. And so what we will be talking about today is how do we address this issue of women in peace and security? And we have got a fantastic panel, starting with the minister next to me, and then moving on, and we will cover Africa, we will cover the Nordic countries and their initiatives, and of course we will also talk to Nigeria and Afghanistan and Pakistan representatives. So we will start, and the way that we will do this is that, first of all, we'll introduce all of the speakers so that we get that one out of the way. And then as we move into the discussions, we will just mention some of the topics that we will be talking about. They are diverse, they are topical, and hopefully it will provide you with a context and the background for you to, in the end, ask your questions, and maybe for all of us to come up with issues that we can progress and make sure that we have progress on this specific issue. And so to start us off, Lord Ahmad of Wimbledon, who is the Minister of State at the Foreign Commonwealth Office and Prime Minister's Special Representative on Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict. Lord Ahmad was appointed Minister of State with responsibility at the Foreign Commonwealth Office and appointed the Prime Minister's Special Representative on Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict in June 2017. Prior to this, he was Minister for Aviation and Trade and Minister for Skills and Aviation Security at the Department for Transport from 2015 to 2017. He was also the Minister for Countering Extremism at the Home Office in 2015 to 2016, and Local Government and Communities Minister 2014 to 2015. Lord Ahmad has also undertaken the role of Government Whip and Lord in Waiting to Her Majesty the Queen 2012-2014, Vice Chairman National of the Conservative Party 2008 to 2010, and Councillor Wimbledon Park and Cabinet Member in the Lord Borough of Merton 2002-2012. The next speaker that we will have, Ambassador Bineta Diop, is a Senegalese women rights activist. She's the founder of Femme Africa Solidarité, a non-profit organization which promotes women rights in Africa. Bineta played an instrumental role in achieving gender parity within the African Union Commission's leadership and in the adoption of the Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality in Africa, as well as the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the rights of women in Africa. She has led peace-building programs as well as many women peace and security initiatives. The second speaker, the third speaker, is Hilde Johnson, who served as Norway's Minister of International Development for 2 terms from 1997 to 2005, and played a key role in the Sudan peace negotiations that led to the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, CPA, in 2005. She was also a member of the UN Secretary General's high-level independent panel on Peace Operations 2015 and a co-chair of the Independent Police Review in 2016. Ms. Johnson is the former Special Representative of the Secretary General and head of the United Nations mission in South Sudan, and she will also speak about her experience during that time. The last and final speaker is Ms. Mossarat Qadeem, who is the co-founder and executive director of PAIMAN Alumni Trust, a pioneer organization in preventing and countering violent extremism in Pakistan. PAIMAN seeks to neutralize extremist tendencies through community mobilization, active citizenship, and community empowerment for building social cohesion and prevent youth from becoming extremists. And with that, Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Andre, and good afternoon, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I think, you know, they will say, and then there were two. If Andre was the first to respond to the call of the Secretary-General, I call myself as the second man to respond to the call of the Secretary-General from this morning. And I think that is a very powerful point, because for seeing the advocacy of having women at the heart of conflict resolution, when you look around the world, and that does include the Commonwealth as well, it does need men to be engaged fully on the agenda. And I will come on to talk about that in a moment or two. But by definition, as I've traveled around the world, and you look around the world, any society that is going to progress, by definition, societies can only fulfill their true potential, progress in a proactive, demonstrable way, if they themselves allow every citizen of that country to fulfill their true potential. And that is why it's not just about talking about women's rights. It's not just about accelerating gender equality. We do so, and we make this pledge and commitment to do so, because basically and fundamentally, it is the right thing to do. And when we look around the world, changes are taking place globally that are turning the tide of opportunity for women. Increasingly, women are taking up national and global leadership positions. And importantly, challenging those outdated cultural norms. You know, I have a real challenge with this. When people say, oh, sometimes they blame religion or culture. I grew up with religion and culture being strong identifiers. They're there to enrich humanity, not to hold them back. And I'm delighted that right here in the United Kingdom, the head of state, and indeed the head of government, the First Minister of Scotland, are all women, as is our Home Secretary, the Minister for the Interior, the President of our Supreme Court, our Metropolitan Police Commissioner, and indeed London Fire Commissioner, and our Director of Public Prosecutions over recent times have been women and are today. Now, this does mean we've made progress on the issue of gender equality, but it does not mean we've done enough. Because when we look at the last election, yes, a record number of women were elected to Parliament. They now occupy a third of the seats in the House of Commons. When I look to the upper house, my own house, a quarter of the members of the House of Lords are women. And there's a quarter of the UK cabinet currently at the heart of government who are also women. These all act as positive role models. And it's essential we see in every sphere, in every sector, in every occupation, in every field of life, that women are playing their central and pivotal role. And when it comes to mediation, it is no exception. Let me assure you, as the United Kingdom's minister responsible for the Commonwealth, for the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and as Andre said in his introduction, as our Prime Minister's special representative on preventing sexual violence and conflict, getting more women meaningfully involved in mediation is a particular priority for me. And I say this not just because, as I said earlier, it's the right thing to say and the right thing to do, but my own experience, my own personal experience, be it professional progress, has been because women mentors, women managers have taken a chance on me. They have given me an opportunity to show what I can do in a particular role. Women have a particular way of bringing people to the fore in an encouraging manner. And we learn. My most positive role models for me personally, be it in my personal life, be it in my professional life, and yes, in politics too, have been women. And therefore it shapes your mind, and I do not get this philosophy that holds women back. It is just fundamentally wrong. And I'm delighted that here today, on behalf of the UK government, I'm also joined by our champion, the ambassador, the envoy, the Foreign Secretary Special Envoy for Gender Equality, Joanna Roper, and her whole team who are working with me at the heart of government to ensure the issue of women mediators, the issue of peace, women being involved in peace and security, in ensuring conflict resolution, is at the heart of the British government's approach. And we all know why this is important. We've seen the statistics. Those agreements that involve women are 35% more likely to last 15 years or longer. Forget everything else. It's working. If it's working, let's do more of it. Some progress has been made since the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 in 2000. But too often, women are still marginalized. Why else would women make up only 2% of mediators in major peace processes between 1990 and 2017? Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, frankly, that is not good enough. We need to draw on our collective experience and expertise to take down these barriers, these hurdles that continue to prevent women playing their pivotal, central, and key and important role at the heart of conflict resolution. Because their involvement, the involvement of women, is central in building peaceful societies. And therefore, today I call on all of us. You know, some of you may have used, those who follow me. I believe in Twitter because it gets a message out there. Social media is an incredible phenomenon. And therefore I say, let's get together behind that hashtag of women mediators and commit and indeed recommit ourselves to intensifying the work to bring about the necessary change we all wish to see. Mahatma Gandhi quoted those very words. We must become the change we wish to see. We must live, walk, talk, and act upon that example. For my part personally, let me assure you, I personally pledge to advocate tirelessly for women mediators. Indeed, one of my co-panelists will understand the Urdu word when I'm sometimes in different audiences and I've addressed them. Someone came up to me and said in Urdu, you aap aurton ke vakil hain, aap aurton ke hamdard hain, meaning you are the women's advocate, you are the person who stands up for women's rights. He may have perceived that as a negative. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a proud label I wear. Therefore, let us join together. Let us pledge, yes, not just on Twitter alone, on hashtag women mediators. There, I've plugged it twice. But we need to actually get on and deliver. We need to act. And the UK government, I assure you, has been working long and hard to ensure that women are included. They are involved. They are consulted through the mediation processes across our great Commonwealth of 53 nations and beyond. We want to work to enhance women's participation and empowerment through our funding, our practical support, and our diplomatic action. Again, through your experience, it riles me when they say we must provide women the voice. Come on, get real. Women have the voice. We need to facilitate to make sure that voice is heard. So now is the time to ensure women in mediation are at the center and heart of conflict resolution in terms of finding the lasting peace we all desire. We need women's skills, experiences, and most importantly, their perspectives to ensure we can shape peace at every stage. And when women themselves are empowered, they do use their voice. They should not find themselves limited to talking about gender alone. Their voices must be heard in all mediation and peace-building activities. But of course, let's speak for the other part of the gender equation, men. There's a few of us in this room. I could embarrass everyone and ask you to all stand to show that there is not just one, but two, but many. And it is important that men need to be involved, not just as advocates, but actually in delivering, helping to reframe those cultural perspectives and demand. Indeed, when you get to a peace negotiation, it is not good enough to say, well, yes, we've got the women involved and they're in that room, and once we've finished all our discussions, we'll bring them in and engage with their perspective. What kind of engagement is that? Frankly speaking, it does not work. We need to ensure men and women, women and men, stand side by side, are at the table together to ensure that we see the resolutions we all desire. I said earlier about role models. Now, this is an interesting term, and there comes a time where you think, do you really just want to be seen as a role model? Because a role model in itself says, there's still so much more to do. Let's look towards that world where women, the first thing isn't just in their introduction that they are a role model. It's because of what they're doing, what they're delivering, what they're achieving. And we need to work towards that. And as we look towards women's experience, sharing those experiences, sharing those perspectives mean that we do identify those hurdles, those obstacles that women face in getting their incredible voices, perspectives, and experiences at the table heard. But hopefully, together, we can give an insight into how these obstacles can be overcome. In a moment, I will hand over to our facilitator, Andre. But to conclude, I would say this. It's in all our national interests to ensure that women are properly represented in high-level mediation. And therefore, I'm delighted to announce that today, the Foreign Secretary announced the launch of the network of women mediators working across the Commonwealth to put women at the heart of conflict resolution worldwide. Initiatives like these are necessary for changing the nature of conflict. And it's not just a mere announcement, we're putting money behind it as well, £1.6 million. But it's important that initiatives like this, and I'm delighted we have representatives from Scandinavia and Norway in particular, when it came to mediators networks, they have championed the cause. When we've seen work across Africa, Asia, Pakistan in particular, and I know my co-panelist today has been a strong advocate on another area where I believe passionately women should be at the heart of resolution, and that's in tackling the global scourge of countering extremism. We must tackle extremism, but by excluding women, we will not get the actual results we seek to achieve. And therefore, I say to you, ladies and gentlemen, let's come together, let's work together, let's collaborate collectively to ensure that we sustain that pressure. Networks across the world, and when we look at the 3 pillars of the Commonwealth, yes, the member-to-member contact, CHOGM itself, the heads of government, how collectively 53 member states, diverse in their people, but therein lies our strength. And the most important pillar, as I often say, is all of you and all of us collectively, the People's Network. Let's sustain that vision, let's sustain that pressure, let's sustain that momentum to ensure we do get the collaboration, the collective action in working together. And as a final point, Commonwealth member states and the UN must also work together. If we are truly to achieve what we set out to desire, that means all international fora. And therefore, in speaking with the Secretary General, I'm keen to see how we build upon what we achieve here during the course of this week in London, to ensure that as we, as Commonwealth nations, come together on the areas where we agree, and by golly, this is one of them, to ensure women's voices are there at the negotiation table, are there when it comes to conflict resolution, are there when we talk about countering extremism, that we work together, bilaterally, collectively, through international fora, to actually see that vision being realized. It was Eleanor Roosevelt who said, "The future belongs to those who believe in the reality of their dreams." Let's turn this dream into a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I think we'll make it a little bit more friendly and stay on in the lounge. For now, I think your point is well taken, Minister. It's when you said it's the right thing to do. I think it's also for now, I think your point is well taken, Minister. It's when you said it's the right thing to do. I think it's also the right thing to do not to view women only as victims and to address them as victims in this context. I think if it comes to things like problem solution, there's a problem, this is how you're going to fix it. And if you're looking at it in that way, and we are seeing that when it comes to conflict resolution and the sustainability of that, what women have been doing all over the world and in conflict situation have been working. Why change that? And why not look at that as a viable model? Because it's not about the numbers. We've seen it also from I think the Swedish or Norwegian minister has said it's not about making women or about the numbers, counting women, but it's making them count. And I think that's a very important aspect of this discussion as well. We'll turn to Africa now. And Ambassador,
thank you.
You have been working in the African Union. You have been appointed as the Special Envoy for the African Union. We would like to hear what the mandate is that you are operating under. We would also like to see how this forms part of the broader spectrum of the UN Security Council 1325. We want to hear a little bit about your experience in Burundi, especially, and getting women to be more part of that process. And then, of course, how do we link this up with other networks that are already out there? We've heard the announcement by the Minister now, which is great, and we congratulate the UK for that part as well. And so making all of this count, I think, remains the bottom line of where we want to go.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon. And I want to congratulate you, Lord Ahmad, and you are truly he for she, and the fact that UK is launching this great network. I think it's part of the movement. It starts from many places, Africa, the Nordic, and other places. You said it, that Africa have experienced a lot of problems. Either it is genocide, either it is apartheid coming from South Africa, but also violent conflict. And Lord Ahmad have also talked about violent extremism. You go to northern Nigeria. I was recently meeting with the Chibok girls that are back, and we need to bring all of them back home. So those are some of the experience. I have been in Somalia, where nobody goes, and meeting with the women and discussing the violent extremism in those countries. In Central African Republic as well. But you ask me really what we are doing in terms of mediation. I think today we talk about women's participation. It's very linked to the previous panel. Myself, I have been in the track 3, 1, 2, 3, because you need to look at the 3 tracks where women have been involved, but where they have been denied maybe to be in the track 1. Women at the backbone of the society, when conflict erupts, you ask women to come and pick up the pieces. That's the reality on the ground. The men run away or are fighting. So women have been there taking care of the family and the communities. Track 3, either it is on health, either it is security, whatever it is. So before 1325, I was engaged with the Mano River women that came from 3 countries, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, Conakry. We all know what happened in those regions. So I was facilitating the formation of the women. As we said, women are not a homogeneous group. They came from different background, culture. People think that women can come together and just say, we are together. You need to mediate, even among the women themselves, to get a common sense and common agenda and a common vision to influence maybe the track 2 or track 3. So that's what happened in the Mano River, whereby at the end of the day, the women strongly lobbied the 3 heads of state to go back, to call for that meeting, convince them. You know, we went to the bad boy. That time it was Charles Taylor. And we say, Charles Taylor, you are the bad boy of this region, but you want to see you sitting with Guinea, who at that time have the larger number of refugees from Sierra Leone and Liberia, to say, yes, we need to see you coming together and talking to each other. It was the women mediation that make that happen. And they were called to go where? To Rabat to discuss. But then, when that dialogue started between the 3 leaders, the women were excluded. That's what happened. Yeah. So we are glad that later on, the women were called when there was negotiation in Akosombo, in Ghana, where now there were real discussion on the Liberia. You have seen the film on Lima Boy, who was outside there, but the members of the Mano River, the chair was the first one in the life, the story the 1325 who signed the peace agreement, Teresa Lee Sherman, as an observer. It happened in Africa. The first one who signed a peace agreement in the world as observer came from that network. So I have been there witnessing it, facilitating the participation of the women. And I'm sure that it's thanks to them that we have seen peace, because the UN was pulling out. And my friend Hilde knows that when the UN said we are out, it's the women who are still there to say, yes, shuttle diplomacy, making sure that peace is restored. My second experience, because you talk about Burundi, was President, the main mediator was Nyerere. President Nyerere, between the Burundi, the Hutu and the Tutsi, and the Twa. Yeah. Three of them starting to fight. So Nyerere became the mediator, call on Arusha talks. I was there, facilitating the women to come together, but influencing Nyerere. We had a discussion with President Nyerere, who said that, are you Twa, Tutsi, and Hutu? Yes, we are. And you are bringing me one document. It means that women have agreed. I have been here for how many years? There was no one sentence agreed by the men. So can I call you in the negotiation? The men said, no. Women, what's your problem? You don't hold guns. So you should not come in the room. So Nyerere said, but within the UN, and my dear sister, you know it, civil society can be given observer status. We fought for it. We were invited in the room. Later on, we worked with President Mandela, who invited us. We started in Cape Town, sit down with him, talk, discuss, and convince him that women have to be part of the negotiation. When we went to Burundi, the first group that Mandela met was the women. And that's where the peace agreement of the Burundi included the gender agenda, because of Madiba, who understood what happened in South Africa, but because the women were at the forefront in South Africa. So he accepted that in Burundi, the women will be part of that process. That's why I said you need to have a mediator that is sensitive, but if he's not, what can we do? I think we need to put it mandatory that the women should be part and parcel in the process. And coming to my not last experience, another experience was DRC, when we were in Sun City with President Masire, where now we were able to influence the rebels group. We went to meet the rebels movement, RCD Goma. We went to meet Kabila's son, the actual president of DRC, and make sure that within now the parties in conflict, we have women representation. Not enough, but we were able to have a number to go to Sun City to the negotiation. So it's a long way that you start at grassroots, but you influence also the table, or what we were talking about, the boardroom, and break that glass ceiling, but make sure you influence. Because one of the influence the women did in DRC was in the Constitution. Because we should not just go and sit as a woman, we should understand what are the discussions. It's about our health, our education, but the resources that are part of the conflict. How do we manage it in the future? The justice issue, we need to know, we need to have the skills. It's not just sitting, but influencing the discussion and sometimes leading the commission. I remember Madam Ruth Perry, the former president of Liberia, interim, was leading one of the commission in the Burundi and sitting there. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, in the Burundi process. So it's not just the number, but it's how do you influence the mediation and negotiation. So in my capacity as an African Union Special Envoy, I spent maybe more than 30 years of my life on peace negotiation. So I understand what is it about for women to contribute, because it's about peace. It's about restoring the dignity of the women, because it's about ending impunity. It's making sure that there are reconciliation, but not on the body and the mind of the women. It's about justice. It's about accountability. So that's why we are demanding the seat to be around the table and make sure that we contribute. And in Africa, right now we are fighting. We just launched the Mediators Network, bringing women that have been part of mediation. There are many of us. I'm not the only one. Many women in the different sphere. Either it's Central African Republic and other places that have the skill, the competence. Why you should just have guns to be invited? Why do you have guns to be part of the governance when it comes to transition? Why not the women when the men have failed as us? So that's the main thing that we need to look at, why women transform. So I will link it to the issue of leadership, the first one, the panel that we just say, because when we want to prevent, that's where we start. Let's bring more women in governance mechanism. Don't just say that we have to get into conflict before you invite the women. Let's penetrate the governance, be in government, ministers, you know, be in parliament to vote the laws, prevent, be in the justice system. So when we see violence against women, women are there at forefront, be in all governance mechanisms. So that's what we say when it comes to prevention. And that's why in Africa, not only we are looking in conflict, how do we solve it, silencing the gun, but also making sure that we have the parity. 50-50. At the African Union, nobody knows about it in the room. Maybe Speaker of Parliament of Uganda, no, but you know, we have 50-50. We have 5 women commissioners and 5 men. Nobody talk about it. Yes, at the leadership. And we are pushing to make sure that it's systematic. My country, Senegal, have 47% of women in parliament because women are fighting to be in that parliament, like the Rwanda and others. Because we know that it's when women are there in numbers that you can even look into the budget that you put in your military. How much you put on health, how much you put on education, how much you put on the young people. So I just wanted to stop here. I have so many things to say as my portfolio, which I didn't share at the African Union, putting in place things that are going to make sure that we implement the National Action Plan on 1325. And you ask me also what the Commonwealth can do, and I will come to that at a later stage. Thank you.
Excellent, Bineta. Thank you very much. And just to say also is that it's not just her, it's her family. She comes from a family of people that have made major contributions in human rights and women's rights. And so thank you for that as well and for the interesting talk. You spoke about Liberia. And I remember at one stage we did a capacity building program for women that have been involved in conflict resolution. And we wanted to impress on them that it's not just about mediation. It's about the full peace or conflict continuum, and that women should be involved in all of those phases, and that we shouldn't break up the phase, because the linear or the phase approach is getting us in trouble all over the world, because people go in, make peace, leave. And the moment they leave, there's conflict again. And so when I asked the women, can you make how do you know when there's conflict? Can you help us with early warning? They said, of course they can help. And we said, but how? No, they know, they said. And I said, but tell us how. No, the bottles in the street disappears. So we said, but how is that possible? What do they do with the bottles? No, they collect the bottles for the water for the people that will be fighting, the men that will be fighting. And so that's an early warning matrix, part of the matrix, and that was in Liberia. And so these are the kind of things that when you work on mediation and mediation support units and what you are doing, that you need to know, and because it makes it practical and it makes it part of the reality of what we are working in. Just incidentally, your previous boss, the AU chairperson, was also very involved in the South African process of bringing women, and if it wasn't for her contribution, women might not have been that big a part of the process in the South African democratization process. So next we have Hilde. Hilde, the questions we have for you is basically about the Nordic Women's Mediation Network. When was it established? What are the objectives? We also saw that there are, the minister also made mention of the fact that they have really made some inroads in their objectives already. So we also from you personally want to hear about the lessons that you have learned as SRSG for South Sudan. And of course, how do we continue to raise the profile of women in peace and security? How do we use platforms like this and others to make sure that it remains there and that people understand this and that people make contributions like they are doing here on the screen? And so with that, Hilde, it's yours.
Thank you, and if I may, I'll revert to the network at the end of my little intervention. For me, this is about change. And the 17-year-old resolution did make an impact for quite a while. But the last SG report on the progress of 1325 shows a dark picture, actually. It shows a decrease in women's participation in mediation after years of steady progress. It shows a decline in requests for and in the inclusion of gender expertise, and a decline in the number of gender-sensitive provisions in peace agreements. This is not good, huh? It's bad. And it's clear that women continue to be underrepresented among mediators, and particularly in what Bineta was talking about, track 1. So track 1 is the inner war room, peace room, rather, where the top leadership is sitting, very often behind closed doors and at very high levels. And then you have track 2, which is expert-type negotiations on land distribution, transitional justice, etc. All mediation efforts have these different sectoral negotiation groups. And then you have track 3, which is civil society, women's groups, involvement from the ground and the grassroots, as Bineta was talking about. And a lot of the work that was done in your case, in many, has been to try to influence all three tracks. But what still is missing is women leading track 1. It's even absent in the UN. There's not a single UN special envoy in track 1 yet. And so this is a huge challenge. And what I would like to do is to speak about 3 things we can do. And the third thing is the network. Okay, so I'll revert to that. But 3 things. 1, redefining processes of peace. I think it's essential to rethink how we think about peace processes. Number 2, addressing the barriers against women mediation, women mediators in particular. And 3, joining hands in networks. So I'll start with the first one, which is redefining processes of peace. What do I really mean? We have this really strange habit internationally of thinking about peace processes as the short period when the top level guys are sitting together, and they're all guys, are sitting together behind closed doors, and all the media attention is there. That's mediation. And then when they get to a signed agreement, it's peace. It's wrong. It's wrong. What is the peace process? And it's true, it's not a continuum. At the same time, it has 3 phases. It's a long and very, very heavy negotiation to get the parties to the table. That's a real major effort. I was part of that effort on the Sudan peace process. It took us 7 years to get the parties really to engage at the table. They would come and go, but they were not really engaged. In the case of Colombia, the efforts went over 12 years at least. And so it's a long, confidential negotiation. Number two, the phase two is the short period when the parties are negotiating. They're 2 to 3 to 4 years normally, where all the attention is on. And the most important part of the peace process is implementation, because a peace negotiation does not lead to peace. A peace negotiation leads to signatures on paper where the two parties are committing to peace and committing to X number of actions that would lead to peace. You get me? So the signature is not peace. The signature is a commitment to peace. And it's a huge difference. So the peace is the end outcome of the implementation of those commitments. And if they are not implemented, there is no peace, and then we get the relapse problem. And the problem we have is that almost 50% of all peace agreements end in new war. They relapse. Why? Because everyone is focusing on the 3 years and the top level, and not on the real thing, which is the implementation. Now, why is this relevant to women? It's very interesting because women mediators and women generally have a much stronger influence and role in phase 3. They have an incredible impact on the complexity of the implementation of an agreement, and a huge role in making that happen. The problem is, if those that are sitting in the closed room are not informed about what is needed of interventions in the agreement for implementation to happen, meaning root causes, meaning a host of issues that are very often ignored, well, then the peace agreement will fail. And so it's absolutely critical and that women are part and parcel of these processes, because they have much more knowledge of what the root causes are. And I think the evidence is clear, Minister, we were referring to it as well. There's a host of evidence that durable peace agreements are more likely to be achieved when women are involved, either through advocacy and in particular through mediation. And so the problem is that women are excluded to a large degree from track 1, which is where these key decisions are being made. Now, how do we change? We need to change the approach. So we need to understand that peace processes are all 3 phases, and the most important one is implementation. And if the most important one is implementation, it will rejig women participation in phase 2. Are you following me? Yeah. Yeah, so then we will get a change dynamic where women will be empowered as key actors in both phases. Now, the phase to get the parties to the table is very often secluded and very secret and very hard to penetrate. But I think you gave a couple of good examples where women actually were essential in that phase. So that will be, I think, not necessarily clear. In some cases, yes, in some cases, no. Now, the second point I wanted to make on what needs to be done is basically addressing the barriers. Which barriers are we talking about? We have a gender bias, we have a security bias, and we do have a cultural bias. Now, what is the gender bias? You were both referring to it. It's the leadership issue. I would like to quote Elizabeth Langer, who's one of your colleagues. She has said, "We are obsessed with former presidents and prime ministers." She's African. So always, it's like a present. So you leave office, and suddenly you are a very competent mediator. How come? How did that happen? So what makes you competent? The fact that you are a former president and a former prime minister, simply. Honestly, we need to be better at this. And of course, this excludes women, because there are few women in these positions. And I would also like to say, it doesn't mean a women president is automatically qualified and competent in mediation, no. We need to have a much better assessment of who's really good at this and who can help. But we need to have a fair assessment that that's we need to have a pool of 50-50. So you actually can double the number of candidates and assessments of competency if you make sure that there is adequate numbers of former female presidents and prime ministers. So getting into public office is key. But you should also look for competent women elsewhere. So the big man syndrome in leadership is a big problem. The security bias, what's that? It's what Bineta talked about. Those who are carrying the gun are the ones coming to the table because they're the only ones that know how they can silence the gun, i.e. women excluded, because very few are commanders, etc. So how do we get around that? Because the terms for silencing the guns is a whole political complexity of an agenda. It's not taking the bullets out of the gun. It's what are the preconditions for me to accept to silence my gun? And that's political. And it's a huge change and reform agenda in most cases, particularly if it's rebel movements against governments. So what happens? Yeah, that means that because the ceasefire or the cessation of hostilities is start number one in most negotiations, what happens is women are out because they are not the ones negotiating those things. Now, we need to get rid of the security bias because in fact and in reality what's happening is these guys are really not doing the ceasefire negotiations. I tell you, the former presidents and prime ministers don't. What they do is they ask the military experts to do it for them. So why can't women ask the military expert to do it for them? So it's a security bias in their heads that women can't deal with this. Of course we can. And it's time that we also get into the highest numbers, the highest positions in SRSG positions. We just got the MONUSCO position. First time an SRSG is in charge of the biggest UN peacekeeping operation. I was in charge of a big one, but this is much bigger. It's MONUSCO, it's Congo. It's my time, because the UN is also lagging behind on these things. So we need to get rid of the security bias. And we need to understand that actually this is a political agenda, and women are as competent to deal with that as anything else. But those women who want to be involved in mediation, it's not bad to do a ceasefire course. Number 3, the cultural bias. Very often in these negotiations, what's happening is not what's happening at the table. Very often what's happening is what's happening not at the table, but in the bar, in the sauna, over a glass or a bottle of whiskey. And these cultural things with male arenas, it's not very easy for women to backslap and have fun over a beer culturally in many cultures in the world. And so these male hangouts is not easy to penetrate. And so this is another area which one needs to look at. How can we create arenas which are informal and can provide a framework for discussion, informal discussion, which doesn't only become male areas? It's not easy, but it needs to be, here you have to have a change of attitude as well. These 3 biases, I think, are critical to really address these barriers. Now, how do we do it? I just quickly will run through 2 things. Firstly, we talked about changing the peace process. That's the most important thing. That would change a lot, I think. Number 2, we need to see the African Union and the UN appoint many more high-level female envoys and SRSGs. Absolutely. And particularly in the military field, because that would really help, but also the political. Okay, so if that is a tall order because, for example, the Syrian parties don't want a special envoy who's a female, which I hope they will, but if not, then there's one idea that a colleague of mine in the mediation network, and I'm getting to that now, has proposed, which is why don't we appoint pairs of mediators? 1 woman and 1 man. So the lad can go off with the whiskey, and the woman can deal with the substance. Good idea, no? No joke, of course, but you understand what I mean. Division, yeah, exactly. Division of labor. And so with these, I think pairs is a very good idea, and I think they should take it up. Now, this brings me to the network, which is my last point, and the network is very useful. I mean, we've just been from 2015, primarily exchanging and sharing information, experience, meeting colleagues, and a few weeks back, there was a global meeting that was with the UN Secretary General's team, because they have an ambition of starting a global network of mediators, female mediators. And so we haven't been operationally engaged as a team or network. It's primarily a network between those who have been and are, and potentially can be mediators, but also to support the ones that are emerging and coming up and advise and help. So it's kind of a typical women network, which is informal, supportive, but not, I can't point to huge results, right? It's actually part of joining hands and strengthening each other and supporting each other. And so we hope now that this is becoming a global thing, and congratulations to the Commonwealth for launching this today. I think we together maybe can look at how this can become even more operational, because if we can get a global pool, which is really strong, a solid number of female candidates, it's going to be much, much more difficult to exclude us from track one. And at the same time, I think we can build the competence needed of emerging strong women that can take on these roles coming forward. So I think with those actions, we can make progress and at least not see the next report from the Secretary General look at decline, decrease. We need to look at the totally different scenery, which is up. Numbers of women, gender-sensitive results, and results for women in the field, and of course, more peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilde. Passionate description of the work, and I think that is what is required now. There's just too much to be done for people to sit back and not be passionate and energetic about these issues. I think one of the things that you mentioned that struck me as well is that if more women are not involved in the peace making, in the mediating phase, because that's really where you are designing the recipe for the new country after conflict. And so if you don't design that right, you are not going to have the parliamentarians and the ambassadors and the ministers and so on. And just incidentally, people were talking about the parliamentarians and Rwanda in terms of the numbers. It is said on the UN website that where quotas are legislated, there are 22.7% of women in parliament. Where it's not legislated, it's 11.2%. So we need a little bit more than a nudge. And I think the peacemaking area is a very important place where this happens. Unfortunately, with statements like, where are the women with the guns, also has a negative side, because the inclusivity argument then brings that if I'm not included, I'm going to bring my gun. And that is a problem. And I think that we need to, you know, the issue also with the whole continuum is the complexity. Although there's a major complexity in the continuum, and that it's more like chaos theory than linear approaches, we're also seeing that there are levels of complexity. And this brings me to the next speaker, Madam. And what we are seeing in Pakistan, and with the relationship with India as well as with Afghanistan, is the whole issue of networks. And I think also the local application of solutions to conflict is very, very important. And I think understanding that local application, how to promote and understand between diverse ethnic and political groups, and also making sure that we know what the communities, what the culture are, what's the external mediators, and of course, from your perspective, what are the lessons for aspiring mediators, especially mediators that are at the local level? We keep on hearing the SG talking about local solutions for international issues, and from our perspective, from the South African perspective, we have seen somebody like former President Mandela talk about Ubuntu and talk about applying a people-to-people approach as opposed to a narrow interest of parties that are there. So the floor is yours, man.
Thank you. It is always difficult to be the last speaker anyway. Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. Actually, I come from an area which is called the Northwest, used to be called the Northwest Frontier Province. Today it is called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and the federally administered tribal area, the area that borders Afghanistan. And historically and traditionally, a woman would always come whenever there would be a feud between the communities. She would just raise her chadar, that is the scarf, in the white color, so that, like, you know, the firing is stopped. That was the tradition. Today, in that same community, and then another tradition was, and it still is there, but it is, like, you know, diminishing, that the feuds between the groups and the communities would be resolved through negotiations and mediation. Thanks to the presence of violent extremists, that mediation and dialogue has taken over by aggression and extremist acts. Mediation today is considered like the act of cowardice. We have to revive it, and we revived it. From our own platform, from my own organization, what we did, we put the elderly mediators, the experts in mediation, community mediation, with the youngsters, both the male and the female in the community, to learn those tactics from them. And I think that is very important. So they mentor today those youngsters in the community who really want to learn the skill and art. Because I believe that, of course, it is very easy to be like, you know, to come and create conflict-like situation. It is very easy to actually, you know, be one of the member of the extremist group. But it is very difficult to prevent not to become the member of that extremist group. And for that, you really need to understand the cultural milieu, of course, the tradition, and the history, and the value of that community. And that's why I believe that there is always, like, you know, it is always important that whoever would like to negotiate or mediate in a situation like ours, particularly I'm talking of not only Pakistan but South Asia as a whole, they need to understand the cultural milieu and the tradition and the history and the legacies of the people residing in those communities. And for a mediator, I mean, it is always, like, you know, good to understand what is the push and the pull factors, why these people have, like, you know, are at war and at loggerheads with each other. Now, to give you an example of Pakistan and India, of course, we have been at loggerheads with each other for almost 70 years. We have become old now. And we haven't yet learned how to live as good neighbors. What is missing is the will to mediate, the will to have a dialogue, the will to negotiate. And for that, you really need not only the political power, but also the power of the people. And that is missing from our region. Now, I'll actually give you an example of, you spoke about track 1, 2, 3. I think mediation itself is such a complex phenomena, because look at the complex situation, look at the conflicts that have become too complex now. Track 1 cannot resolve it. Yes. Track 2 cannot deal with it. Track 3 cannot address it. So it has to be, mediation today has to be multi-layered, multi-leveled, and having a multi-pronged approach. So you cannot miss, like, you know, the women in this process. Women are important because in my case, in our case, women had been the fundraisers, the supporters. They have been actually, you know, the radicalized one who used to provide all sort of support, you name it, to the extremist groups. Now, how to actually bring them and convince them that you really need to actually, you know, be part of this society, active citizen with positive attitudes. You need to mediate with them. You need to engage them in this discourse. And then we also have the extremist groups whose approach is totally different than mine. Mine means those who are on the other side. So you need to actually speak to them. You need to actually convince them, and you need to bring them to the table of negotiation. That how is important, how you are going to bring them to the table of negotiation, how you are going to actually convince them to agree what you want them to agree to. And I'll just give you an example, and you have heard that example. And that example is two of my mobilizers, because we have been working in the area which is still hard hit by violent extremism. It is called the federally administered tribal area, again, that borders Afghanistan. And one of the agencies, FATA agency, is called Khyber agency. Two of our mobilizers were abducted. And we were actually we do an integrated project which is health and of course preventing violent extremism, but camouflaging it with health and education. So 2 of them were abducted. And then it was, I was in Peshawar, and when I learned about it, I said, because those 2, of course, we are supposed to be providing security and protection to them. So I went straight, drove almost for 1.5 hours to that area, which is, of course, the no-go area for the settlers and the settled people. So I went there, and it was the house of that leader of the extremists. You know them by the name Talibans. I don't call them Talibans. You can ask me why. And so he's a very famous, well-known, of course, extremist leader. So I just went on the gate, and the gatekeeper, he told my colleague, a male colleague and my driver, tell her not to come down because I just opened the door of the vehicle and I wanted to come down. He said, and I said, why not? Of course, so I just went. It was a big gate, and there was a small, small door inside in that gate. And I just said, please open this. He said, no. Anyway, he had to open it because it was a Pashtun woman asking another Pashtun man to open the gate for me. So he had to open it. So he opened it. And when I went inside, it was like full of 40, 50 men with big turbans and, of course, the beard over there. And, of course, they had all the guns and the Kalashnikovs. So for a little while, I just said, what have I done? But anyway, so I had to gather all my strength. And I said, because the moment, I saw there was somebody sitting in the middle and who covered his face with his big chadar like this. He didn't want to see the face of a woman in front of him. Anyway, so I, just said, oh, brother. I had to say that anyway. So I'm here because you have abducted 2 of our mobilizers. And then he just said, because you are here on a foreign agenda, you are being you are using this US money. I said, yes, we are using US money. But for what? We are here to provide health services for your mother, for your sister, for your wife, and for your granddaughter, and for your daughter. Is it bad? What the Quran says about it? Your life is very important, sacred. So you have to take care of it. Anyway, I had a conversation with him. Why I'm saying this because, at that time I realized that I had to engage this man in this dialogue and had to convince him using whatever knowledge of the Quran I had at that time. And I did not bring women into it, I said the relationship. So the core of my dialogue with him was based on the relationship, just to touch his heart. And it worked. Actually, he, of course, now he exposed his face. He started having a sort of a dialogue with me. And whenever I would just start talking, the other men would just raise their Kalashnikov just to scare me. Anyway, I wasn't scared. After 10 minutes, I was okay. So he agreed. He was convinced, and he agreed that, and he asked everyone in that area that we are going to support whatever PAIMAN does here. We are going to protect them till this date. It was 2009 when I had a dialogue with that person, and till this date, we are working in that area. And thanks God, nothing has happened so ever. So that's my very small, example of the mediation that I did at a very little level. But I think what I'm trying to imply here is the content is very important. And it's not only the content. It's who is doing it, who is saying it. So for a mediator, first, the knowledge is extremely important. You need to know what to say at what time. Second is the skill. You need to actually, you need to have the skill to negotiate and to influence, because, I have tried to draw on the picture. It was quite scary. But then you have to have the strength to carry forward that dialogue. And another important, and I think I always focus and I always emphasize on the knowledge. Knowledge is important. The content is important. And I was a part of a track 1.5 diplomacy between Pakistan and India. And at that time, I was very young. I'm talking of 1992. Between 1992 and 96, I was a part of that diplomacy between Pakistan and India. And it was a group of ex-military bureaucrats and civil bureaucrats from both Pakistan and both sides of the border, Pakistan and India. And we were only 2 women. And they used to call me the youngest in the ancient a lot. And they would never listen to me. First, I was a woman. Second, I was the youngest one. So I have no clue, no experience. So what I did, I said, okay, these men are not going to listen to me. They are always going to bang the tables whenever the issue of Kashmir would be there. So as a researcher, I started gathering the data. What can work between the 2 countries? And at that time, the trade between Pakistan and India, was going through the third party, and the third party was benefiting from it, and it was almost running into 3-4 billions, and the trade between Pakistan and India was just a very small portion of it. So what I did, I came up with all the data, and I presented, and I requested, see, please, I just want to speak for 5 minutes. He said, okay, fine, they just gave me in the elm, okay, fine, go ahead. So when I presented the data and I said, why don't we actually start working around the peripheral issues instead of focusing on the core issue of Kashmir, we will never be able to resolve this. So let's start mediating about this issue and start talking about it. And when I gave them the data, and I also actually converted the data into how it will affect the development of the 2 countries. It was the point for them to ponder over for the next 2 sessions, that is for the next 1 year. And believe me, for 2 years continuously, we started debating and discussing about it. We wrote agreements with India, between India and Pakistan. And when I presented that in 1993, the trading articles between Pakistan and India were only 55. And then when I finished it, it was 450 by 1996. So again, I think I would just say, yes, women are important, but my question is, which women? And who these women should be? Thank you. I hope I finished it.
Thank you, Mossarat. One of the other ways to know who is important and who is not, Minister, is that as a young diplomat, I was taught that if a country announces a big project, and it's announced in a similar speech as the State of the Union or the State of the Nation, in our case, it is good. But if the Minister of Finance also puts money to that project, then you know it's serious. So we know it's serious, and thank you for that. I think we don't have a lot of time, and I know that from experience this morning, there are people burning with questions. So I'm going to throw open the room for questions, and I'm sure the ushers and the colleagues will help us to do this. Okay. In the front here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just identify yourself, and if you have a specific question for a panel member, please direct it to them.
Okay, my name is Rebecca Kadaga. I'm the Speaker of the National Assembly of Uganda. Really happy to be here. Now, mine is not a question, it's a proposal concerning the appointment of women special envoys. There is a gatekeeper called government. It seems if you are not supported by your government, you can't be appointed. So I want to see Madam Bineta and UN Women make proposals directly to the Secretary General. I know it's a bit unorthodox, but I think that's the only way we shall get women into those positions without having to go through the government, which may not want to appoint them. The government appoints their friends. They're in the AU together. They're in the UN together. They're the ones they know. So let's create another channel for the women through our other fora. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You can take more questions.
Yeah, sure. Colleagues.
Because I'm happy to comment on that too.
Thank you very much. I'm Sirpa Mäenpää, Ambassador for Mediation from Finland. And I would really thank the Commonwealth Secretariat and UK for taking up this most topical issue also here in the Women's Forum of Women Mediators. And I would like to thank the panelists for sharing their rich experience and also their background in women's movement and politics and preventing extremism. For many of the regional women mediators networks, the goal is not only to have more women as mediators, but the ultimate goal is really through that process to have more women in the peace table. And as a comment on what Commonwealth and the UK might be supporting with the news now presented today, we have heard today many interesting comments on the political participation of women, how that can be supported. And really, what you have been discussing shows that, in fact, this is also part of the continuum, women in the peace process. It can be seen as an, let's say, early phase of the electoral cycle that Helen Clark was talking about in a transitional context from war to peace. And we have also been hearing fascinating national experiences, and I would really hope that women, but also men in peace processes might tap into these experiences, have exchange visits, because that kind of ideas either to neighboring countries or to distant countries might help them to see their own situations in different ways. But I would like to pick up a question on the women mediators as a tool for promoting these women at the table more generally. Hilde Johnson's country, Norway, has made that transition in their own bilateral facilitation in Colombia and Philippines, switching rather young women to or middle career women to be the lead facilitators. And clearly, now we see in the international fora much more women from the peace processes of those countries. So it seems that at least partly it does function. You have mentioned other ways. Women's movements pressure is important. There need to be a few he for she's. Would you like to mention some more let's say, important factors? You haven't mentioned, for instance, the national action plans for 1325.
Thank you. There's a question, yeah? Oh, you're next.
I'm Grace Attard from the National Council of Women in Malta. I have spent many years in conflict resolution in the Mediterranean region where women are concerned. Two questions, and very briefly, but I think very important. In the work that you are doing, how are you dealing with the selling of weapons? We know that we are fighting for something social, democratic, human rights, but then we have the biggest weapon, the selling of weapons, even from Western countries, let's admit it. And the second point I would like to raise is the question of refugees in camps. The situation, I know from personal experience, the horrible situation, the abuse that exists in refugee camps. What can we, you or anyone else do about it? The EU and what the EU is doing, I don't think it is enough, actually. Thank you very much for your interventions.
Thank you very much. That was quite an interesting panel of discussion. My question surrounding, my name is Alimatu Dimoni Kenya, and I'm an anti-FGM campaigner and a lead women and girls advocate. It's around the issue of FGM and child and early forced marriage. I know we're talking about conflict and resolution, and so in terms of the UK and the UK context around FGM actually now falls within terrorism and radicalization. So my question to the panel, and anybody can answer the question, because 200 million women worldwide, women and girls, it is said every 6 minutes a girl somewhere in the world is cut. That, for me, as a survivor of this practice, is war on women. And I think it's about time this discourse is brought within the framework of peace and resolution. I myself, looking at the issue of Rwanda and other countries where conflict, and particularly the DRC, where some form of conflict resolution had been used in the past to resolve the issue of sexual violence. So using the UN resolution, for example, 1328 or 1325, sexual violence in conflict. So again, in the UK, FGM is sexual violence. So back to the African Union, the Commonwealth. I come from a country, Sierra Leone, where the prevalence of FGM is close to 80 to 90%. I'm happy to hear the 50-50 Malpat from the Mano River Union and their role played during the civil war in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea. But unfortunately, the issue of FGM prevails. And I think it's a conflict, a hidden conflict in most of these countries, a lot of them that fall within the Commonwealth. So I'd like to know how we could bring these hidden or others that are never spoken about in the round table when talking about conflict resolution. How can we resolve these things using the mentor network that we're all talking about?
Okay. Thank you. We are running out of time, and I would like to have each of the panel provide at least an answer to some of the questions. Are there anybody burning to ask the last question?
Tēnā koutou katoa, ana hila kanunga ta asuisuiki, the Women Parliamentarian Pacific Region Chair. My question is just carrying on from Hilde's point in terms of pairs. Just want to congratulate the hashtag Women Mediators, but have you ever thought about, I just want to hear from the Minister what his views are on pairs in terms of male-female mediators. Thank you. And in terms of bigger challenge, if we're really talking about gender equality, why don't we change these roles into co-chairs, co-presidents, co-secretariat, co-co. That way, women are at the table, because we are 50% of the population. Malo.
Minister, your name has been called.
Listening, first of all, thank you for your questions, and I'm also, I mean, it was, as you probably saw me, I was scribbling away when my co-panelists were speaking, because I think as a minister in government, it's not just about talking, it's not just about saying what the government's doing, it's importantly about listening and learning from experts in the field, and I think that needs to happen. In direct answer to your question, maybe picking up on Hilde's point, as someone who's totally teetotal, if we get women to do the substance, it means people like me are left redundant. So there has to be a space for the non-whiskey drinking men of this world, and I do fear we'd be left, but on a sort of positive and a progressive note, I think it is important that we see, not just in the context, and I think it's worthwhile exploring this, at some point there will be someone, if two co-chairs disagree with each other, there will need to be an agreement found. So I just park that thought with you. But I think the way around it, of course, is to see more women at the forefront. We've talked about women as SRSGs. Well, it's about time, and this is something for the UN, let's have the Secretary General. The Secretary General of the Commonwealth is a woman. It's about time we saw greater progress in international fora. And a simple message to all the countries. As I was doing my sitting at home trying to identify every leader and foreign minister across the 53 Commonwealth countries to make sure I captured the right person at the right time, especially on the leaders. I was proud to say there was a couple of leaders across the Commonwealth. One happens to be our Prime Minister. Prime Minister of Bangladesh was another captured. The best way of ensuring women lead on negotiations is electing more women as Prime Ministers, Presidents. And I think the Commonwealth provides a great opportunity to do just that. There's various other points, but in the interests of time, I'll desist the politicians' temptation in answering every single question or attempting to, but thank you, and it's a very pertinent point and noted.
Thank you. Bineta?
As Special Envoy on the African Union, of course, I agree with my sister from Uganda that we need to have more women coming from other sectors, either in Parliament. But I see the new Secretary General really appointing more women as a special representative, not coming from government side as well. I'm civil society. I never enter into a government position. That's the reality. I've never been in Parliament. All my life, I have been in conflict zone. and women's human rights to support. And of course, the AU have appointed me as special envoy, the first one in the history of the African Union as a female, but you should not stop there. We need to have more women in that position, especially in mediation. We have Graça Machel and Kofi Annan in twinning when we saw the Kenya example. And I think we need to have more than, Kofi Annan and Graça Machel. Graça being also a former minister, but in her own rights, being an activist as well. So I think you are right, Madam Speaker. As special envoy, what I do is not myself going to mediate, but making sure that there are enough women shown, and that's why I put in place a repertoire for women that are in mediation. And also sometimes they say, oh, they don't have the skills. I say, okay, let's just make sure that we have the capacity, women can be trained. The men are not trained, like you say, the prime ministers and so on. They don't know, but let's make sure that we...
Women are trained, at least.
They're awesome.
Yes, so for me, it's important to have those rosters, so they see the faces as well, and that's why FemWise exists. This is also the African Union Mediator Network, with a lot of women that are capable and competent that can be part of this platform. But another thing is accountability. I'm trying to make sure that African government, who have 22, have NAP, National Action Plan on 1325. Some of them will say, Uganda have one. Some of them will say, we don't need NAP. But everybody needs NAP, either for prevention or participation or protection. And for me, since I started, we had 15 countries, now we have 22. I just made the review. But I'm not looking into having a continental NAP. I'm working on making a continental result framework. Because enough laws, we have them. Policies are there. What we need is implementation. So I'm working on a framework for reporting to say how many women have been put in place, for example, in the IGAD on the South Sudan talks. We need to make them accountable. So that's where I'm really working on. Yeah, I stop there. I thank you.
We've got 2 minutes left, we're told, so I'll just spend 1 minute on saying that the UN has developed a global roster for women mediators, candidates for these positions. When a candidate is on the roster, you will actually be asked if the SG finds you competent for a position. They will advise the government to say okay. It will be much more difficult for governments to say no, because it's their own citizen that is getting a very prominent role. So that, I think, is a way around your very important and good point. The other point on mediators and Norway's experience, we've deliberately worked on young women and mid-career women, giving them more prominent roles in mediation where our country has been involved, such as in Colombia. And I want to just emphasize one thing that I experienced myself, but also is a very typical experience of Norway, and is that we have taken on these roles on the basis of people with long-standing relations. I want to support very much what you were saying. Cultural knowledge, connections, relations over 30 years, and then we've built these relations, and it's on that basis that we've engaged in peace processes. So the local knowledge, the relations you build, they are much, much more important than anything else, and that's the only way you become a good mediator. Yeah. It's through capitalizing on your knowledge, culturally, also politically, of course, but that we should not underestimate, because that was a bit absent, but you emphasized it. So you have to have this real strong history with the parties to be credible as a negotiator. Yeah. And then sometimes if you have that, it doesn't always matter which gender you have. I was a young minister 20 years ago, and I ended up being the key mediator between Garang and Taha during the CPA negotiations because of relations. But then I think I was more an X factor, not a gender person, you know, because I just ended up being something that they couldn't label. And then you can go between. No, but you understand what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So then I think you can manage.
Mossarat.
Yeah, coming actually from Pakistan, where I just said, I think what the Commonwealth would really, what I would really like to see is make the government understand that women's role is very important when it comes to resolving the conflict, when it comes to mediation and dialogue. Because in that part of the world, even like, we had the women prime ministers in South Asia. The first, I think female prime minister in South Asia was from India, Pakistan, and of course, Sri Lanka. What we really need to do is, even if the women are there in the parliament, they should remain women. They should think women, and they should feel for women. That's what it is important. Thank you.
Thank you. And that leaves me to thank the panel. Thank you very much for your insights and your contributions. I'm sure it was an interesting panel for everybody. There's a lot more to be said. There's a lot to be read. And there's also a lot to be followed, I think. I think as the initiative has been addressed, there's other networks all around the world. Women are getting more and more involved. And not just because they, like I said in the beginning, are victims. It's because they should, and they make a fantastic contribution. I've seen it. It's seen in the statistics and the sustainability of peace agreements and peace processes. And so with that, thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you around.
Come. Let's get a picture together.
Mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Microphone test.